All right, I'm going to go ahead and get us started. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Carrie Farmer, and I'm the co-director of the Rand Epstein Family Veterans Policy Research Institute. I want to welcome everyone to this webinar today. This is part of our bi-monthly webinar series focused on high-priority veterans policy issues. Next slide. The Veterans Policy Institute has as its mission to conduct innovative interdisciplinary research to improve the lives of those who have served in the U.S. military. We aim to publish and widely disseminate our research findings to connect objective and rigorous analysis to decision makers so that we can improve evidence-based decision-making. I have a couple of quick housekeeping items before we get started. We have the chat feature open in Zoom here. So please feel free to ask questions or share resources that the audience might be interested in. To ask questions to the panelists, please use the Q&A feature, which is also open. We'll monitor that and we'll try to get through as many questions as we can. All right, next slide. Today, I'm pleased to introduce my colleague, Whitney Livingston, who will provide a brief presentation of the findings and recommendations from a series of policy roundtables we held last year on the topic of military to civilian transition. Whitney's presentation will be followed by a panel discussion with our guest experts, Eric Ebersole from Hiring Our Heroes, Colonel Jarrett Thomas from Soldier for Life, Tammy Barlett from Student Veterans of America, and Walter Hurd from the Army Transition Assistance Program. The panel will be moderated by my colleague, Daniel Ginsberg, who's the Associate Director of the Personnel Readiness and Health Program and our National Security Research Division here at RAND. Whitney Livingston is a clinical psychologist and an associate behavioral scientist at RAND. In addition to her work on transition, her research interests include sexual and intimate partner violence, suicide risk, and PTSD among service members and veterans. She previously worked at the VA National Center for PTSD and has a PhD in clinical psychology from Utah State University. And with that, I'll turn it over to Whitney.
Thanks so much, Carrie, and thank you all so much for joining today. As mentioned, I'm going to be presenting results from a roundtable discussion on policy recommendations for transition support. Next slide, please. So each year, over 150,000 military service members separate from the military and reintegrate into civilian life. How smoothly that transition goes can really have significant implications for their life trajectory, as well as that of their families. Next slide, please. So transition support really comes from two primary sources. The first are federal programs, and the other is nonprofit organizations. Next slide, please. And to provide an example, let's look at employment. For military to civilian employment transition support, both federal programs and nonprofit organizations provide support. So among federal programs, there's about $13 billion spent annually on military to civilian employment transition support, whereas nonprofits really work to fill the gaps where needs are unmet. Next slide, please. While there's so much support in that area, there also are shortcomings. So among federal programs, there are some activities that are duplicated across agencies, while there also is some confusion as to who is responsible for certain aspects of transition support. For nonprofit organizations, there are some shortcomings on outcome measurements, and funding is not always guaranteed, so some of their efforts may be drawn away from providing transition support in order to secure future funding. Next slide, please. So RAND VPRI held 4 roundtables focused on key transition challenges with subject matter experts from the VA, DoD, and nonprofits. For the final roundtable, RAND VPRI invited 15 experts to vote on and discuss potential policy recommendations. So in this presentation, I'm going to review some of those recommendations that had the greatest agreement and those that had the greatest disagreement. So starting off with those with broad agreement. Next slide. So for that first one, there's a wide array of federally funded transition programs. Evidence on the effectiveness of these programs are limited. for some and non-existent for others. Moreover, there are some reports that indicate certain transition programs are falling short of their requirements. So experts agreed at this roundtable that federal transition support programs should be independently evaluated. This next one really focuses on the fact that currently the burden of finding transition support is really put on the veteran and their families. So experts agree that a central website that lists different transition support programs and how effective they are at providing support is really required to help streamline this process for veterans and their family members. Next slide. Oh, okay. Great. Families oftentimes play a major role in supporting service members as they transition out of the military. And this was really a big point that came across the different roundtables. So subject matter experts agreed that spouses and families should receive more support during transition, including DoD incorporating family members in the transition process and providing them with resources. Next slide, please. All right. So I'm going to focus a little bit more on the 6 recommendations where experts disagreed, as these are really going to be the baseline for our conversation today. And next slide. So there were 6 recommendations that had broad disagreement. This first one stated that VA's VEO office, Veterans Experience Office, should really assess veterans' experiences so that they can improve pathways and support development of more personalized pathways for transition support. So thinking pathways that are more specific for those seeking higher education or various types of employment. Much of the discussion focused on whether VEO should be the responsible office. Some supported VEO in this role, stating it works great with nonprofit transition programs. Others said that VEO is limited, does not hold the same influences, for instance, Veterans Health Administration, and that because it's congressionally mandated, it's not consistently funded. So this could bring up issues long term. That second one, really participants agreed that service members who are transitioning out of the military may not receive all the support they're required to, and indicated that a Bill of Rights for transition support may really establish the importance of providing individuals with supports prior to and during their separation. So here, the idea is that this might hold leadership accountable to transition support requirements. And those who disagreed mentioned that it would be considered a joke or that it wouldn't have real teeth to protect service members, and noted that this would be particularly true if it wasn't tied to an actual evaluation. For that third recommendation, across the roundtables, experts discussed who should be the lead agency. So many agreed that VA should lead these efforts, stating that DoD is not incentivized to help service members transition out, whereas VA could be a useful change. However, others argued that transition support must start prior to separation, which really means that DoD needs to be involved in these efforts. And next slide. Right. So across the roundtables, a consistent question was whether resources should go towards supporting the greatest numbers of service members, or whether efforts should go to a small number of service members with the greatest need. Those in disagreement mentioned that there already are nonprofits that provide services to individuals with the greatest needs, and that those that focus on specific needs oftentimes run into difficulties meeting that demand and end up triaging them out. This is going to create more obstacles and challenges as veterans and their families are trying to navigate the system. Others mentioned that focusing on service members with the greatest needs will result in those who look good on paper falling through the cracks and not receiving adequate support. For that next one, service members are required to take DoD TAP, Transition Assistance Program. However, commanders really control whether they participate and attend that. So the idea here would be to tie TAP attendance rates to officer evaluation reports, with the aim of holding commanders accountable for their service members receiving transition support. Several agreed, with one expert stating, "I think this is 1,000,000% necessary. What doesn't get measured won't get done." Those who disagreed mentioned transition is not the commander's responsibility, but really the service members, and that it's unfair because some units and command may have more service members separating, whereas others may have fewer, and that's going to create a difference in burden. Finally, and along the same vein, this final recommendation suggests that independent evaluation to determine TAP approval processes used by commanders and to assess whether this process is effective. So experts discuss that commanders may have other mission-oriented goals, such as preparing for deployment, and that these could incentivize them to kind of hold off on sending service members to TAP. They also noted that commanders have not left the military. And so this could be actually a difficult process for them to support service members through because they might not actually know what that process entails. All right, that is the conclusion of my presentation. I so appreciate you joining for this, and I'm going to hand it over to Dr. Daniel, I'm going to hand it over to Daniel Ginsberg. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Whitney. That was great. I'm really pleased to help moderate the session today and engage with our colleagues at RAND VPRI, which is doing so much to raise these vital issues related to our veterans. I'd like to introduce our illustrious panel today. We have Eric Eversole, who's the president of Hiring Our Heroes, a nationwide effort to develop and promote military talent in the United States. Working with a broad array of private and public sector partners, his team helps to create and connect transitioning service members, veterans, and their families with meaningful employment opportunities. We have Colonel Jarrett A. Thomas II, who is the director of Soldier for Life, an Army program that connects soldiers, veterans, and their families with education, employment, health and wellness, and U.S. Army retirement resources and information. Tammy Barlett is Vice President of Governmental Affairs for Student Veterans of America, a network of nearly 1,600 on-campus chapters that ensures student, veterans, and military-connected students achieve their greatest potential. Retired Colonel Walter M. Hurd continues his service as the National Director of the Army Transition Assistance Program. We appreciate all of you participating today and lending us your observations, both on this presentation and then your wider thoughts on this critical issue of assisting service members with their transition. I'll start with a question for Tammy. Tammy, as we've noted, many people seek educational opportunities after leaving the military, either instead of or in addition to getting a job. What are some of the unique transition needs for student veterans, and how well are these needs met by existing transition programs?
Well, first of all, thank you, Daniel, for that question. Thank you for Student Veterans of America here on the panel today, and then also involved in the report that was discussed earlier. So to your question, many student veterans are those non-traditional learners who are trying to juggle families, school, work, while they're all navigating this unfamiliar academic environment. So they bring valuable leadership and experience, but still may juggle how to select a degree program, where they see themselves in their next chapter after they transition, understanding financial aid, and accessing disability accommodations on campus for themselves. So that may lead to mental health challenges. Sometimes it's related to their service-related disability, which can impact their academic performance, making access to online campus mental health services, even VA healthcare and peer support network very essential, just like our chapters there on campus. And that's why TAP should be expanded to include not only what we see robustly from DoD, VA, and the Department of Labor, but more extensively an integration of the Department of Education. Having those resources and strong partnership with those veteran serving organizations like SVA. Department of Labor comes on and talks about careers, and VA comes on and talks about benefits. But I think where sometimes that mark is missed is, what if that career and adding to those benefits has an education, has a degree that goes along with it? So ensuring that the Department of Education is there in those conversations to move forward in their journey. And while programs like TAP provide, like I said, those career initiatives with interview assistance and resume writing, we want to ensure that initiatives like that Success on Campus, VSOC, and then VA's VITAL program, the Veterans Integration of Academic Leadership, are there to support and tailor those mentorships and academic support along the way, really ensure that veterans have that help in their higher education journey, and the institution and policymakers are there to help support them along with their credit of military experience, their prior enrollment, and then their expanding mental health resources along the way.
Thank you so much, Tammy. My next question is for Eric. Eric, Hiring Our Heroes is one of the largest nonprofit organizations working to help transitioning veterans find employment. How closely does your organization work with the federal government, and what suggestions do you have for better collaboration?
Well, thanks, Daniel, and thanks to Rand for including us in this important discussion. We work and have worked for more than a decade very closely with the federal agencies. Our work really started critically with a partnership with Joining Forces when that office was stood up by the White House. And over the years, we've continued to grow those relationships, not only at the federal level, but also at the base level. I think we often forget, like politics, most of the things happen locally on those bases, and we've been very honored to develop relationships over the last 10 years, hosting events on military installations, participating in SkillBridge, and creating pathways. The partnerships have been both meaningful and impactful, and we're really thankful for that. How do we improve collaboration? I don't, based on my experience in military and relationships, I think it just takes work. It takes trust. I mean, military bases are, closed installations, and I think sometimes nonprofits want to say, just let us on base and we can fix all your problems. Well, it doesn't quite work that way, and it never has, and quite honestly, probably never will. Relationships matter, trust matter, and we've been thankful for that. But Daniel, I would say that the thing that we have to look at, and Rand really teed it up back in the summer and fall with its research and its follow-up roundtable discussions. I think we have to take a step back and really take a holistic look at transition as a whole and ask ourselves, are we really doing a good job? Are we really meeting the mark? Are we serving transitioning service members and veterans and helping them find meaningful careers? And I will tell you that, again, I've been doing this for more than a decade, and this isn't a knock on any of our federal partners or the programs that are being administered. There's a lot of data out there that suggests that we're not doing a good enough job. And again, it's not what the services are doing. It's not TAP. It's the fact that we have too many transitioning service members who receive their DD-214. They go home, and then there aren't any resources for them. They're on their own. And some of them figure it out. That's great. But many of them don't. And if you look at the data that's come out consistently from whether it's Rand or McKinsey says that 60% of transitioning service members make less in their first civilian job than what they did in the military, it's not a great result. Or 61% are underemployed after 3 years. Or what LinkedIn said was that they're half as likely as their civilian peers to get promoted to director or VP roles. These raise very serious questions as to what that process looks like from a civilian employment point of view, and what we need to do in the future to better serve the military community and their families.
Colonel Thomas, what kind of measures do you track to determine how well Soldier for Life is meeting the needs of transitioning soldiers? What are the biggest challenges you face when working with soldiers who are about to leave the military?
Yeah, Daniel, thanks again, for this opportunity to speak today on this webinar, and thank Rand for the opportunity as well. So we have 2 analysts here in Soldier for Life. We track things like unemployment rates. We track things like where soldiers decide to retire into and the reasons for that. But bottom line is, how prepared they are for that transition. I think we all know that regardless of how someone enters service, service members will eventually decide to transition for military service. And preparation, we believe, is key to that transition. This preparation, of course, is an investment in their future. And these investments in our soldiers' training, education, financial readiness, health, and well-being, coupled with the whole of government efforts to support their transition are proving effective. And just like was mentioned earlier in the discussion, each year approximately 150,000 service members transition from military to civilian life. For many, that transition is an opportunity, to take on new challenges, build a next chapter in their lives. But for others, this time can still be daunting and filled with a mix of emotions and uncertainties. And I believe it's the nation's duty to care for all types of veterans, regardless of where they are in this particular journey. And that's why I think everyone that's listening to this webinar can help. When we look at this, existing research shows that for some, navigating the military transition can still be a burdensome and confusing time for our veterans, their families, their supporters, and others. And while progress has been made, data still suggests that around half of recently separated veterans still don't connect with available resources or benefits for several years, and sometimes only after they're in crisis. So improving that military to civilian transition can serve as early intervention. Some of those downstream challenges that we see soldiers facing, like veteran homelessness, suicide, health, unemployment, underemployment, and poverty. So addressing these challenges, we believe, can have a lasting and ripple effect in the community of all the veterans, family members, and caregivers that are out there. So that's kind of what we see and some of the challenges that we continue to face with our transitioning service members.
Okay, great. Thank you. Mr. Hurd, you are responsible for the Army transition program. I'm aware that there are continual efforts to improve the program. I'm a former DoD official, so I certainly saw, all the services really engaged on this issue, and particularly over the last decade and a half. But I was wondering if you could talk about some of the recent upcoming changes to how TAP is being implemented.
Yeah, I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you, and thank you to Rand for the opportunity. Lots of changes in the TAP space over the last several years, decade and a half that I've been here. I will tell you, the Army looks at the Transition Assistance Program as having two essential tasks: to prepare the soldier with resumes and budgets and that sort of thing, and to connect the soldier to employment, home, etc. So we focus the program on those two tasks. In doing so, the first thing we do is an assessment, and that's a DoD-wide assessment. Clearly, some soldiers need more help than other soldiers. So what we want to do is allocate our resources in accordance with those who need the most. From that assessment, we too are a very data-driven organization. I've got multiple data analysis station. We know that Army veterans are employed at a higher rate than non-Army veterans. We track get degrees at a higher rate than non-Army veterans, and several other things as well. So that really the program overall, with more than simply attendance, it has a virtual TAP center 24/7, counselor, and work your way through the resumes and budgets and all the things to do. And then ultimately, we really push the go early and go often effort in the Army. We report that by command to the senior leaders of the Army so that they can apply pressure as needed. Thank you.
Great. I have some questions for all of our participants that I want to open up. There was a really interesting question in the chat about we've had two. Thank you, Mr. Hurd and Colonel Thomas. We've had excellent Army representation. I was wondering if maybe in your engagements with the other services, or Eric and Tammy, if you could talk about, are there any nuances among the difference in the services about how they're approaching transition right now, or is there pretty uniform sort of focus on this topic? Any of you could please give your insights. That'd be really helpful to everyone.
Yeah, I'll make a comment. I represent the Army on on the interagency work group for TAP. So I interact, if not daily, weekly with the other services. And you have to understand, the Army, of course, is equal size as the rest of DoD put together. We transition about 100,000 soldiers a year, active guard and reserve, which is roughly equal to the other services with their guard and reserve. So understand that some of the services have all MOSs with a direct link to a civilian skill. So their need for TAP, frankly, is less in a service where every MOS has a civilian equivalent. In the Army, the bulk of our MOSs do not have a civilian equivalent, so that step then is a greater step for much of the Army. So we focus a lot on the young, at-risk soldier that I think some of the other services don't need to focus on because the risk is so much smaller. Over.
And if I could address our portion. So typically when I'm out and about talking, I try to reference service members as opposed to soldiers, even though this is Soldier for Life. But in a lot of forums, I'm one of the only active duty members, speaking in a particular forum. So I try to address all of the needs. But our program actually came out of what is called Marine for Life. Marine for Life came out first. And what they do, and we still partner with them on a lot of stuff that's out there. And the Navy currently is working with both the Marine Corps and Soldier for Life to create the Sailor for Life program, and we're looking to kind of help with other services as well. But typically, and there are some nuances between each service, but typically the needs that are out there for each service is generally the same when it comes to employment, education, and health and wellness across the board. So we try to address those with all the services and help each other when we can. So definitely respect and appreciate that question that came up.
Mhm. I have a question here, very, very interesting about, obviously a lot of this is on the employment community, all the large, small, and medium-sized businesses across our country engaging. Can you all talk about, what can be done in terms of engaging with all the thousands and thousands of employers across our country? And maybe Eric and Tammy, you all are kind of working both sides here really aggressively, so maybe you can each talk about that.
Yeah, let me just say this about it. The short answer to the question is yes. The employer community certainly can do better. Right? They would agree with that. But I think a lot of the challenges that employers are facing in this country isn't simply related to how they hire from the military. It's really how they hire or make skills-based hiring decisions. And so this is, many companies talk about skills-based hiring. How do you evaluate talent and skill sets beyond a piece of paper and certificates? And that's not easy to do. And companies have talked about it a lot, but if you look at what the World Economic Forum is talking about as the top skill sets, the top 5 skill sets, none of them are technical skill sets. It's problem solving, it's analytical thinking, it is resiliency, and it's really hard to evaluate those attributes based on a resume. And that's why we've invested, and I know the Army has been a great partner on this, why programs like SkillBridge is so vitally important, because it allows companies to make the assessment of talent, skills-based talent that doesn't show up necessarily cleanly on paper, so that they can put them in the right positions and make sure that they're paid at the right level based on what they're going to contribute to the company. And so we all have to do better on this, but it's a big problem that the employer community is facing, not only as it relates to the military, but really the next generations of workers in our country.
Daniel, if I may quick add, here at Student Veterans of America, not only do we have a wonderful and strong relationship with Eric and his team at Hire Our Heroes, but at our national conference that we hold once a year, that is a great opportunity to reach those student veterans and those students that are going through their education at that time and looking for that next step, looking for the internships, looking for the fellowships and the possible jobs that that can lead to. So on our campus, which we pretty much the exhibit hall, we have those companies set up to do that. And then if they need to and have space, and many of them have asked for a private space to even hold on-site interviews, and to see a student veteran come to NatCon, not knowing anyone, and possibly walking away not only with a wonderful peer support that they've gathered throughout those days, but then a possible internship with some amazing companies that we have partnerships with. It's just great to see that happen.
Thanks. Thank you, Tammy. Thank you, Eric. This, I think something that's really coming out is that this is a very nuanced problem. There are a lot of different angles to it. There's a supply side, demand side. I wanted to, excuse me, Mr. Hurd, did you have a follow-on point from the last? I didn't want to, I was going to toggle to a new question, but certainly want to let you, please.
I just want to follow up a little bit. I like to think of that we don't have a sales problem with industry. We have a distribution challenge with industry. And Eric, you probably know all of us, and you certainly do. Every industry, every corporation needs to hire talent, and they knock on our door constantly. So it's a question of distributing out to you.
Great. Thank you. Mr. Hurd, you're sort of breaking up a little bit, but I hope you got your point in. I think we heard it. But I did want to just continue with my question. This is a very nuanced problem, but there were some disagreements among those the roundtable participants about the idea of having the VA take even more responsibility within this realm of transition. In light of some of the discussions and these bigger issues, I was just wondering, if the VA took on, TAP and all programs, would that sort of more effectively deal with the facets of this issue? I was wondering if you all could address that question.
I'd say from my standpoint, go ahead, please. Well,
I can certainly address that because it's a common and frequent topic at the interagency work groups and all the services. And I think the VA agree that still the DD 214 date. So the services and only the services can facilitate their attending TAP. And as the name implies, transition, much like a quarterback handing off a football, the quarterback's responsible until he hands off the football, and then the running back is responsible. And it's the same thing with soldier to veteran or service member to veteran. The services own them until that date, and then the VA owns them. So I will tell you that we work very closely with the VA. They are at every single TAP class. The VA benefits brief is the #1 most popular thing in TAP. Almost everybody goes. So they're absolute partners, and we look forward to handing the football off when we get to that part of the play. Thank you.
Daniel, I think Walt and I are probably the only two people who've actually been doing this as long as we have. The VA tried this in 2014. It was called the Veteran Employment Center. It was supposed to be a one-stop shop, and it was supposed to be mandatory, and nobody signed up for it. And I think it underscores Walt's point that, the services own the people, the bodies, until they receive their DD 214. And that's going to create some challenges where the VA owns the system even when they're on active duty. Now, that's not to say I think we need more of a resource safety net after they receive their DD 214, because right now that handoff is not. To Walt's analogy, there's a lot of fumbles, and a lot of service members aren't getting the resources. They're left on their own. The safety net is gone, and that's creating this pathway of bad things that we're seeing where they're making bad educational decisions. Oftentimes, they're ending up with employers that aren't the best choice for them. And we really have to invest in, and this was, I think, Rand's point in his study, we have to invest more in the education or the post-service employment resource world than we're doing now. So I think, but I would say, look, I would love to see, and I don't, this is probably more of a pipe dream. I would love to see a transition battalion so that service members can, at some point of time, focus solely on their transition. Right now, there was a question in here. Commanders are put in a tough position, especially related to skill bridge between readiness and letting service members participate. That's not fair for the commanders. It's just not. But it also is coming at an expense of some of the service members. So this is where I would get back that we really have to start thinking about solution sets that allows the military to do what it does incredibly well, which is war fighting, but also put our service members in the best position to have long-term meaningful careers.
Mhm. Eric, it's
If I
interesting.
can add to this,
Please,
yeah.
Thomas, go ahead.
Yeah,
Please.
you know, commanders at all levels, and this is all services are responsible for those transitioning service members and making sure that they participate in TAP. And, you know, ultimately the services are responsible for those transitioning service members if they don't attend TAP or don't attend on time. So, you know, and plus we're, you know, they all belong to DOD, you know, before they separate and retire from service. So these service members are our responsibility, I believe, until then. And, you know, our parents, our spouses, family members that allow the service member to join the military, they know that they're joining the military, they're not joining VA initially. So most of those required transition processes, as we talked about earlier, happen long before they transition from service, and those factors to get them into TAP and other important, you know, responsibilities happen before then, need to be handled, you know, on this side prior to their transition.
And if I'd like to add,
Please.
I feel there's a lot of value in the knowledge. And when you see that a good portion of those who decide to join the service is for education benefits and possibly the healthcare benefits too. So really pinpointing those who have that, it was one of their reasons to join the military, kind of bring them into those conversations earlier, that maybe how the Department of Education can help assist knocking out some classes or maybe some certifications or degree that they can do and obtain during their active duty time. And then also looking at that service member, especially during times of milestones, marriages, when they have a child, a promotion, a new duty station, and understanding how some VA benefits can already be obtained by them at that time. Home loans. Looking forward to education or what things are available for them and their families after transition, but having those conversations while they're active duty during that time, or if they have an incident that might not be so severe that might not end their service at that time, but understanding the process that they're going through at that moment with that injury, and give them an idea of how that disability compensation process with VA is afterwards, or that 180 days prior to their service. Having that knowledge of what they need to think of in the back of their mind, like maybe if I am having hearing loss now, maybe I should see the audiologist and get that dictated into my medical record, because so when I transition out, it's more easier to show that nexus during that procedure.
You know, I think it's important to realize that it's not just a service member going through the transition, but families. And I was wondering where are you all? Where's your head on how military families, spouses, dependents, what kind of assistance can they be provided or support? And is there a way to sort of more closely integrate them into the transition process? I really appreciate your thoughts on that.
I'll be quick on this. We got to get them jobs in the first instance. And I know we have the service buy-in across the services, you know, and it's been an important issue, but and this has been it's a tough issue, but and we're making some headway, but we have to help if we can make sure that military spouses have employment opportunities when that service member transitions. Not all the financial burden lies on that person, and that's a tremendous advantage because right now we have too many service members, and we see the data where it's all on their shoulder to either be really successful and find a career that's paying as much as they're making in service, or not. And that's tough. So I've been really pleased to see how much support we've had across the services over the years on that critical issue.
And if I could add to that, for us, veteran unemployment was really high back in 2012. It was like 21% at that particular time, and we were paying $500,000, $500 million for unemployment compensations. That was our main focus. It's not the focus now. We still continue to monitor, veteran unemployment. But we really monitor, like Eric was saying, the spouse unemployment, because it's still about that rate for our spouses. And many of our families in the military live on 2-income households. And, many of those service members may decide to separate earlier than they intended because their spouse is having difficulty finding employment. So it is critically important, like Eric was saying, that we focus on that spouse employment piece. That helps with retention in the military, so that not only the service member can grow a career, but so can their spouse, over time as well.
We have a saying in the Army: you enlist the soldier, but you re-enlist the family. So as Colonel Thomas mentioned, and Eric, you as well, and we all know, they are dramatically underemployed. All data shows that. So we encourage spouses to come with their soldier to TAP. Obviously, there's no forcing mechanism. We encourage it, and it's good. Not a whole lot do, frankly. A lot of soldiers, particularly younger soldiers, are single, but even with the older soldiers, probably less than half do all of it. But it's certainly something to think about. I want to address, Erica, a comment you made a few minutes ago, which is a frequently brought up idea about having a transition unit, a battalion or something where everybody goes for some period of time to do TAP. If you add all of TAP up, it's maybe a couple of weeks. What we found, again, through a data-driven organization, is that when soldiers spread it out, it's much better. Frequent comments about there's just too much information, I can't take it in. That's why we try to break it up half day at a time instead of just jamming it down your throat for Monday through Friday. So I think it's more effective that way. There are challenges, obviously, but again, with spreading it out over time, the soldiers and the leaders can kind of choose when to go. I can't go this week because there's a big exercise, but next week I'm at home, so I can go next week, for example. Thank you.
And Daniel, I just want to quick add, looking at military spouses, many of them are veterans themselves that just transitioned prior to that service member. Recently, I had a conversation with a student veteran who got out of the Navy herself. Unfortunately, she was on an aircraft carrier while she was doing her TAP online. And when she pulled into Norfolk, she was kind of like, let go at the gangway. But she's a military spouse now of also an active duty member who her husband is going through TAP on base. And she's learning so much more from him going through that process and being involved in that process too than she did in her online TAP just a few years ago.
Well, I just wanted to drop back a little bit again. I mean, we've been sort of teasing out a few individual issues. I'm wondering, just talk about how you've seen, the transition needs change over time. I mean, this has really been under kind of real focus over the past really decade and a half. And so thinking about that, where is this issue sort of heading? And what are some of the challenges that are sort of coming here that you're really maybe not on the front burner right now, but what's going to be, if we're thinking about this, a few years ahead or even another, 10, 15, what's this conversation going to be like? What's going to be hot within that?
Well, here's what I would say, Daniel, is, when we started these efforts.
I'll jump on that one and throw out a couple of comments.
Mr. Hurd, Eric
Oh.
was in the middle
I
of
think it just
maybe a
probably
lag.
delay.
Yeah, 2 seconds. So,
I'll make mine quick, I promise. You know, when we
Go
started,
ahead.
we were doing triage. I mean, in 2011, 2012, 2013, we had a massive unemployment problem and we were doing triage. And so the evolution, I think, that's occurred in this space, driven by employers and organizations and our partners in the Army and the federal agencies, is that companies are now recruiting military talent a lot more or more closely akin to how they do college campus recruiting. They're going on these bases, they're recruiting people back to where they want them to work and live. But I think that evolution is going to have to continue in order for us to be really successful. And that evolution is going to have to continue to make sure we have the right training and the right skill sets matched to what the employer needs. We're working on that. That evolution is going to continue. And I'm one of the biggest advocates of SkillBridge. How does every college kid in America get a job? An internship. And it's not because they're not coming from great schools. It's not because their degree is not valued. It's companies don't know how to evaluate talent without seeing it in the workplace. So we're going to have to figure that out because it is creating a pretty significant burden on commands.
Mr. Hurd, do you want to?
And Daniel, I'll try to answer your two questions. What's changed in the last dozen or so years? I think two things really. One, at least in the Army, and I think all across DoD, we've tried to spread TAP out. You were fat, dumb, and happy on Monday morning, and you better be squared away on Friday afternoon because that's all you're getting. Also, 15 years ago, frankly, it was hard to get a job. Now soldiers, service members have lots of choices. So choices takes time to make an informed choice. You got to really think about it and ask yourself hard questions. So those are two big differences. I think in the future, where we need to go, I believe, is really two things. We need to work on the post-transition data and the worm handoff feedback. We need to close that loop so we really know if Private Jones was or was not successful. We know his or her goal. What we don't necessarily know is were they successful. I know if they are unemployed, but that's about the limit of it. And the second thing is an assessment. I talked earlier about we start off with an assessment. So we're, I'll say, in kind of generation one, Gen 1 of that assessment. And as that matures over time, we can more fine tune, give surgical tap instead of just kind of everybody picked from a grab bag. So those are a couple of things to think about. Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
I think a lot of it too, and I agree with both. I think a lot has remained consistent over the years as well too. For decades, service members have been focused on employment, education, health, and wellness. And as soldiers depart service, we typically give them, two main missions: hire and inspire. So what I mean by the hire piece is, going to the civilian world, achieve the American dream, take advantage of the GI Bill benefits that you've earned, get a great job, raise a family, get to the point where you're then hiring, veterans just like yourself. And then when given the opportunity, help inspire the young men and women that are, military age to come in and serve just like they did, to have an opportunity to make the most of what they have in their lives. And I'll tell you that, we're trying to maintain this all volunteer force, and we've done it well over the years, but again, we've got to do this right. And this transition piece, I think, is critically important to make sure that we have more people that want to become, the service members that we were, so we can keep this going.
Mm-hmm.
So I just want to pull on some threads that were mentioned. You talked about being inspired and giving back. That's the thing, networking. You need to have those transitioning service members networking, not only for peer support and ensuring that transition, that someone got their back and is talking to them along the way and ensuring that they're hitting their milestone marks after transition, but then also networking them to talk about them in rooms that they should be in, but unfortunately at that time they're not there. And hopefully those conversations and understanding of those relationships lead to a successful and long employment going forward. And then Walter had mentioned about following back and seeing how successful they are after transition, but then also asking too, like, you transition, you might have a job, but what other needs and resources do you have? Are you housing secure? Are you food secure? Do you have healthcare? Do you have dental needs that are being met? You know, do you know that you can go to the VA and get some of those covered for the first few years after transition? So I think all in all, great plugs for both of you. Thanks.
Well, I work for a research organization. And Mr. Hertz sort of talked about how do you sort of assess how things are going, and particularly with veterans who've transitioned. I'm wondering, I know folks like Dr. Livingston and team of VPRI and across RAND would love to do some sort of studies, but I was wondering, just really thinking not whether it's research or how do we sort of get at some of the questions of how we're doing with our veterans. Is it studies? Is it, is there some kind of, just engagements from the VA? But how can we keep engaged and understand, what the real needs are of those who've transitioned?
Well, that's the $1 million question, and it takes another 2 hours to even get around to it. Obviously, the needs of those who transition are just like the needs of everybody else in society, right? Some are huge early and constant interaction before and after DD 214. That's how you get it. Potential study. We know in extreme detail all the demographics of who did what parts of TAP for years, hundreds of thousands of data points. The government also knows in some level of detail who did good and bad things on the other end, right? Everything from jail to paying $1 million in taxes to getting a doctorate, you name it. So what would be handy is to connect those dots and identify trends so we can determine what really works and what really doesn't work. And then we can do what's so important, which is to identify the risk, mitigate the risk, and then measure that mitigation. And that's really the objective of TAP, but it always needs to be sharpened constantly. Thank you.
So
I think,
something
go please.
I was gonna say, so something SBA is talked about over many years is that we'll be struggling even identifying veterans who are in higher education because they may not all be using their VA benefits to do so. They might have exhausted them. They might have even exhausted the VRNE program. And now they're attending a class on campus, maybe paid for themselves or by their employers. So ensuring that those stakeholders in education and in employment are helping us all identify those veterans and those who served in the military and ensuring that they're being seen and they're documented and counted and reaching out to them that way.
And I was going to say, I think, the studies that, RAND does and others is critically important to us. I think we've got to get beyond the admiring of the problem phase. I think we've talked about this for years, about the difficulty with transition, for years. And I think that, once we get to the right solution set and, studying this and coming up with the solution, I think is critically important, and rather than continuing to talk about, hey, there are challenges out there, and there probably will be challenges, to come, but solving some of those issues that we're having currently, and putting that information out there so service members, as they're navigating this process, understand, hey, here's what you're about to face, and here is some recommended solutions, I think are, helpful, in addition to what we receive from TAP and other organizations out there.
Well, we only have a few more minutes. I wanted to just just sort of focus into bring it back to the the current day. We have a new administration and Congress that just been seated. What are the number one thing you would tell policymakers, or what issues to focus on, and where do they need to go in this more immediate term? We've talked long term, but what are some immediate needs here? So whether it's the National Defense Authorization Bill or during hearings of the legislation, what needs to be done right now? Mr. Hurd.
Uh, I'll jump on the grenade first, and I mentioned a couple of them. It's to be really policed up with the follow-up data that we now have somewhere within the federal government. Everything about you is known. So we need to connect the dots and see what helped success and what helped failure, so that we can adjust the pre-DD 214 phase. And that's really part of that warm handoff to see what's really working. I will tell you that simply involvement in the VA doesn't necessarily mean success or failure. It's entirely possible that you transition, have a great job with health insurance, and you're off and running. That's success, even if you may not use like any other process. Thank you.
And I'll be quick. I think really it's anything that can improve the military to civilian transition process across the board, specifically to ensure veterans connect with their benefits early. And this, I believe, can serve as that early intervention I talked about to some of the downstream challenges with some of the things like veteran homelessness, suicide, health, unemployment, underemployment, and poverty. Also, it can be something that can have a lasting impact on our military's ability to recruit future generations. So I think any policy or any program that they can help us with military to civilian transition would be helpful.
And I'm going to second what Mr. Hurd had mentioned, agency interoperability of data. Something SVA was really passionate about and continue to push forward is a conversation of DoD data shared with PSLF. If you're a public service loan forgiveness and you've done your time in the military and you're now trying to help yourself wipe away that debt you have, they know you served in the military, but education, who you're applying the form to, does not exactly talk to DoD, who can say, okay, yes, they did serve during this time, and I can validate that check off and let's move on. But yes, interoperability between the agencies is very strong and needed.
All right, I'll be quick, Daniel. So I would first and foremost, I mean, I would love to see transition tied to the recruiting process. And I think, that could pay some significant dividends, but that's probably going to be a bit down the road. I think near term, what we really have to focus on is we have to make sure that SkillBridge or some variation of SkillBridge is available. And if they can't do it because of military exigencies, let's find a way to let them do it after they receive their DD 214. It's critically important for student veterans. We see it time and time again, but it's not just student veterans. It's a lot of transitioning service members who need that internship opportunity to get the right job. And we have to continue to create legislative a framework to help military spouses. We started an internship program called Military Spouse Career Accelerator Pilot with DoD a couple of years ago. We've seen tremendous results, but we need to continue investing in these programs that create employment pathways for military spouses.
Well, thank you very much, Eric, and thank you all the discussants today for your observations and for what you're doing to sort of address this really critical issue for our service members, our veterans, and their families. Thank you to the Randa Epstein Family Veterans Policy Research Institute, Whitney, Rajiv, and Carrie, thank you for the leadership you're providing. We look forward to continuing the discussion. Please check out Rand's research page. VPRI is releasing so many reports on this critical topic and others. And we look forward to engaging not just with our discussants today, governmental sponsors, but also the wider research community and the wider community overall. So thank you all very much today. We appreciate it.
Thank you.